Welcome to Ageless by Rescu. This podcast is devoted to exploring the science of rejuvenation, uncovering the most trusted experts, the must-have products, innovations, and technology in the field of vitality, aesthetics, new beauty, and cosmetic enhancement. Dr. Pikoos, I am so delighted to have you on the show. We sat together at the Merz Confidence to Be research presentation, and your presentation was so illuminating to me as a woman, as a mother of a teenage daughter, as someone who runs a platform called Ageless. It was really a good sense check for me.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really great. It was such a great day and event, I think, talking about confidence and how that can come from cosmetic procedures, but also when we need to keep ourselves in check and be a little bit careful not to let things go too far. So I think it was nice to talk about the balance.
You know, with the changes to the advertising guidelines and where Australia now stands with regards to the clinical testing that's required for cosmetic surgery. It's not required for non-surgical procedures. That's been clarified. I've had so many DMs about that, like, oh my goodness, do I have to see a psychologist before I have injection or filler or laser? No, you don't. But with cosmetic surgery, yes, you do. But I think the thing that I found most fascinating from your background, and not just your presentation, but speaking to you afterwards, is that body dysmorphic disorder is something that's kind of like thrown out as a catchphrase, BDD. You'll hear about it on social media, or people will kind of allude to it in conversation, but it's a serious clinical disorder.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sometimes get a bit frustrated with the misconceptions in the media when it does get thrown around on social media, because sometimes it can downplay the seriousness of how it actually presents clinically. So the bulk of the clients that I work with have body dysmorphic disorder, which is a psychiatric condition. And usually the distress around their appearance is so extreme that in some cases they're not leaving the house at all because they feel terrified to be seen by other people. You know, it really impacts their ability to work, to socialize, to date. And it's different to just, you know, all of us have things that we don't like about ourselves, right? Every single person has something that they could say, you know, if I could fix this, I would, or I feel a bit insecure about this thing. But with BDD, usually, you know, the emphasis on that area is much greater, and they think, you know, they look deformed or hideous or monstrous. The words that they often use are really extreme to describe how they look. So it can be quite different just to normal body image concerns.
And when it comes to non-surgical procedures, which was kind of the topic of the day when we attended that event, they're now, I guess what Merz was saying and what the doctors who were presenting and yourself who was presenting is saying, that there is an intersection between responsibility from the aesthetic practitioner or the surgeon, the brands and the media that are adjacent to this industry, myself included, and the patient.
Yes, yeah, because I guess, you know, for the patient, one of the key things with BDD is that it's a distorted perception. So often the things that they're fixating on don't look the same to other people. You know, they see themselves as having a huge nose, or they're fixating on a line on their forehead that other people can't really see. And so they might come to an aesthetic practitioner and ask to have that line removed or their nose proportions fixed, but it would be unethical really to go ahead with that procedure if you can't see what they're talking about. You might say, yeah, great, I'll take your money and do what I can. But, you know, if there's nothing really to be fixed, then it's not right for the cosmetic practitioner to be treating right away. They need to be having a more in-depth conversation about what that person's actually looking for. And I think there's a responsibility on the patient to be open about those concerns with their practitioner so that it can be an open and honest discussion as well.
And in the non-surgical space, there's no obligation to use the psychological screening tools, which have now come into place since July 1 in Australia for cosmetic procedures. But I'm interested because one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen in this line of work was your opening slide in your presentation, which was some research conducted by another company. It wasn't Merz, it was another company that linked attractiveness, physical attractiveness, to a whole host of outcomes. And they range from being more likely to get a job to leaving a much more satisfactory first impression on a blind date to being considered more dominant, more intelligent, more skilled even. So, it's not a myth. There is such a thing as pretty privilege.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Pretty privilege, the beauty premium. It's been termed all these different sorts of things. And there is a lot of research evidence to support it that, the way that we look, our attractiveness, beauty makes a difference, particularly on those first impressions and decisions that are based on those first impressions.
So
And
in
so,
that event, isn't it, can you, I guess you can, but you see the darker side of it. I can see how compelling it is for people to chase optimal beauty, because when the upside, even on first impressions, is so potent, it's really hard to just, separate that outcome from what is essentially possible. And then, you have examples on social media on very, very famous people who literally do not look anything like the features they were born with. And, I'll throw some names out there like Bella Hadid or some of the Kardashian Jenner clan. They literally don't look like their genetical composition. They have changed everything.
yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you. Like, it makes sense when there are these benefits to being beautiful, to being attractive. Of course, people want to do what they can to increase their pretty privilege. I think the danger of it is when we take that too far. So I think, it makes sense that, we want to put our best face forward and look as best as we possibly can. Often, particularly with people with body dysmorphic disorder that come in, they report those statistics to me, but people are more likely to get a job, or they're more likely to have satisfied blind dates, and that's why I need to be beautiful. And I think it can be taken to the extreme that, we need to strive for that beauty at all costs, that we sort of forget about other things that are important sometimes in the process. And that's the risk of it. A lot of the time, when people go in and get cosmetic procedures or they're engaging in beauty treatments, they report this comment that was made to them when they were 6 years old or 8 years old, and now they're in their 20s or 30s, but that comment has really stuck with them about the way that they looked. And so these things about our appearance, they affect our confidence and our self-esteem, and we hold on to them. And also, people who have been through trauma, it's more common that people who have been through traumatic experiences are more likely to seek cosmetic procedures or feel self-conscious about their appearance as well. Sometimes it's because they feel like, the trauma's aged them and they want to sort of get some of that time back or do something nice for themselves after they've been through a really horrible experience. And so, yeah,
It's kind of like the cutting all your hair off or going platinum blonde, but taken to the next level.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So
but that
in the research that you presented, I'd love for you to share some of the highlights of, and I guess let's talk about the positive aspects, the link between feeling good, because it wasn't just looking good, it was how that treatment or that procedure or that outcome made you feel. And once you got that feeling right, that's where the glow and the halo effect presented. Is that correct?
Yeah. And that research that we spoke about before about, more attractive people getting all these benefits and blind date satisfaction and all of that, I think the link there is probably also confidence. That it's not just about the fact that they're more attractive, is that because they maybe are more attractive or they feel good about themselves, they present more confidently. And therefore, they get all these positive benefits coming because of the way that they present. And
So
certainly,
when you work with a clinical patient, is
yeah.
that your end goal then? So not just in the BDD side, but if someone comes to you with just presenting maybe even light versions of that, is your goal to guide them towards greater self-confidence?
Yes, absolutely. And aesthetic treatments can be one part of that journey as well. That can be one thing that you do that helps to increase your confidence. But I want to work with people to develop confidence that's balanced, that comes from the way that they look, that comes from their abilities, their relationships, that comes from an inherent sense of self-worth that even if you have a bad body image day or a bad hair day, you know, you're still a worthy person. You're still a good person. It doesn't mean you can't leave the house that day. And so getting your confidence from a range of sources is often what I want to work with people on.
There was another slide in your presentation that I remember called Socio-Cultural influences. And I'd love for you to explain that concept and how it relates to confidence and how it relates to the feedback that we get around an enhancement of our appearance.
Yeah. So socio-cultural influences, I guess, taps into some of that pretty privilege that we spoke about before, that for, you know, a long time, there's been this emphasis on being beautiful, being thin, although even that's changed over the years. We go through stages of, you know, curvy's in and thin is in and curvy's in. And same with, you know, different beauty trends, they change over time. And so those beauty trends can have an impact on the way that people are perceiving themselves. So that could be one socio-cultural influence. And what's considered popular, who are the celebrities and the influencers that we're all looking up to at a particular time as well. So like the Kardashians, every time they get a new procedure, everyone wants to jump on board with that.
I've got to jump in here and say something that I saw, and I would love your opinion on this. I saw the advancements in AI where AI had generated influencers and they had set up social media accounts for these AI generated images of influencers, and they were kind of mid-journey. They walk, they talk, they were in social settings, they were in group settings, and it was indetectable whether they were real or AI generated. And they were some of the best looking men and women I have seen in my life. And I, knowing that I was looking at an AI generated image, I, as a nearly 50-year-old woman who is well versed in all of this, who attends these seminars, who speaks to professionals all the time for my job,
Mhm.
there was a part of my brain that coveted that appearance, that coveted that skin tone and quality, that beautiful hair, that
Mm.
perfect bone structure, that youthfulness. And I thought, oh, this is going to be really problematic because it's one thing to want to emulate a social media influencer or an actor or an actress who is a real human being. But it is a whole other ball of dice to want to look like an AI generated perfect image. And it's here.
Yeah. Yeah. It scares me as well. I've also been seeing a few of those AI generated influences online, and it's terrifying because exactly that, you know, we all look at that and think, oh my gosh, you know, I wish I could look like that. But I don't think, you know, aesthetic medicine's not advanced enough to make people look like an
And you
AI
don't want
generated.
it to be. You don't want it to be that. But it's
No.
going to change the norm. And that's the thing that scared me the most because again, I'm not so worried about myself because I'm kind of, I have life experience, my frontal cortex is closed, all of those things. But I think of it as, next generation of young women and young men who are
Mhm.
already under so much pressure and they have so many more input sources for what they should look like. We certainly did. I'm older than you, but I certainly did. You certainly did. But now, if they're also competing with an AI generated image, that's nuts.
Yeah. Exactly. And you were asking about some of the findings from the Merz research about these sociocultural influences. It's interesting that you bring up the age differences because what came out was that everyone, you know, across the age groups under 30s, 30 to 50, over 50, they all said, you know, it's important to be physically attractive in our society and that physical attractiveness makes life easier. There was pretty much agreement with that across the board. But where it differed was, you know, society's beauty standards of how I should look affects the way that I feel about myself and my appearance. That influence was the strongest
Yeah.
for under 30s. But
Yeah.
then as people got older, they were able to kind of build up some resilience to that. They recognize, yes, society thinks it's important to look good, and it is, and I like to look good, but you know, it's not affecting how I feel about myself as much on a daily basis. But certainly that younger age group who are growing up with these AI images and filters and all of that are really vulnerable to feeling quite self-conscious about their appearance online.
Well, we see it. I mean, I work in the beauty industry. As I said, my background is, in cosmetics and beauty and luxury. And now, this side of the media, um, I talk about longevity, cellular wellness, aesthetics,
Mhm.
the new science of beauty and how to look and feel better for longer. And so I guess even though the research shows that as you get older, you're less likely to be influenced by the socio-cultural pressure, it still carries with you. And I noticed that in the Merz campaign and the research that they did. So what they did is they paired up aesthetic doctors with patients, and they had I think it was a 1-year journey, aesthetic journey, that so they had the psychological assessment, they had the consultation with the doctor about, where they were at, why they felt that they would like to have some physical enhancement. The doctor worked with them to provide the aesthetic care, and then the results were revealed to the patient, and then their psychological happiness with it was measured. Am I correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Was that the process? And I'm wondering, since you worked kind of on the behind the scenes of it, what was the overall feeling that you noticed as a clinical psychologist from the impact of improving their appearance through aesthetics?
Well, you could see it. I unfortunately didn't get the chance to meet these people in person, but I got to obviously review the videos, and you could see it in the videos, the moment that they looked at themselves and they saw the final product, there was just this enormous sense of relief, feel maybe a confidence boost. It was almost like a weight off their shoulders, maybe for some things that had been
Yes,
bothering them for a while.
yes,
And for people, some of the people had spoken about difficult things that had happened, and they'd been through COVID, and they'd been feeling pretty crappy about themselves, and then after this treatment they just had the opportunity to see themselves maybe for a moment how other people see them, even because when we look at ourselves, often we're stuck in the self-criticism and we see ourselves really negatively. And then I think in this campaign they were able to see this before and after, and this big difference. And that really was like a big confidence boost for them after a difficult period that they had had.
so I'm going to ask you a devil's advocate question, because we all remember, it's kind of like we all remember your first time. And I certainly remember, the first aesthetic treatment that I had. It's like mother's milk. It is so intoxicating. You really can't believe the difference. And or if it's something that's very specific. So I'll share with you. I've had 2 rhinoplasties. The first one I had was before I turned 18, and then I had to have a revision one because my skull and my face changed and grew. So
Mm.
I had to have a correction when I maybe 7 years later. So the last one I had was when I was 25, and the first one I had was when I was 17.
Mhm.
And over the years, the shape of my nose has changed. Obviously, your skull changes and your septum changes. And so my aesthetic physician has given me what is known as a liquid nose job,
Mhm.
which is liquid rhinoplasty using filler to correct any deviation in the curve. And the first time that I had this treatment, it was as gratifying as when I had surgery. And I can tell you, I was walking on air. And I've had it another 2 times over the past, I want to say 8 years. I
Mhm.
don't know if it's just me, but there's been a diminishing return on excitement, I'm going to call it,
Yeah.
uh, from this treatment, which I don't have all the time. And recently, I went to the same doctor that I see for all my treatments, and I was picking on a particular area under my eyes, and he stopped me and he said, "Okay, we're not going to do that because that's an imaginary fault in your mind, and I'm not going to treat that because it actually doesn't need to be treated." And I'm wondering, what we can do, if you have some expert insights on how we can self-regulate.
Yeah. Yeah, that experience that you're talking about is so common when you're getting particularly non-surgical procedures where there's sort of repeated treatments or maintenance treatments over time. It's called perception drift, essentially. So you forget what you looked like when you started or before you started the journey. And so the first treatment you get, obviously you get the biggest difference because you go maybe from nothing or from a baseline to the improvement of the treatment. And that's where people have the biggest confidence boost, the biggest dopamine hit almost in the satisfaction.
100%, yes.
Yeah. But then the next time, especially if it's a maintenance treatment, you don't want to get that big difference again the same time because you don't want to make your appearance look drastically different every time you get the procedure. Because if you do, that's when you start to look a bit distorted or a bit strange, or you drift away from what you originally started with. So ideally, your injector or whoever you're seeing is doing something quite subtle to maintain the results. So you don't see as big a difference. But the other thing that happens in your brain is your brain adjusts to your new appearance. And so that becomes the new normal.
And
You
I want
forget,
to say an example of that that's being talked about a lot is the cast of Just Like That, which is the Sex and the City reboot.
yes,
And
yeah,
when that show came on air, and the characters that we have watched on a million reruns when they were in their 30s, but we've still got them, I guess, implanted in our mind as 30-year-old women who've just moved to New York City for the first time. And then they come on the screen as 50-something-year-old women. They've played with aesthetic and surgical procedures to different degrees. And then it was a pylon. There was a
yeah,
social media pylon of, oh my goodness, what have they done? Why did they? Who did this? But the thing is, to me, that was also, if I can use the word and correct me if I'm using it incorrectly, slightly dysmorphic from a viewer perspective,
mm,
because we'd forgotten that 2 decades had passed.
yes. Yeah, we're not seeing the change happen slowly over time. It was the drastic difference from then till now. And I think we were talking about socio-cultural influences before. Another big socio-cultural influence is this perception of, as you age, you become less relevant or less important in
Yes, that
society.
was such an interesting part of the research.
Yeah, and that was something I mentioned, that the younger group were more impacted by the beauty ideals and wanting to look attractive. But certainly, as you got above 30 and into your 50s, they were more impacted by this belief that, as you get older, you're less relevant in society. And so we need to hold on to our youth.
I noticed that with the men in the Merz campaign.
Yeah.
That was, to me, that really touched my heart to watch that absolute uplift in confidence, because they did feel that they'd recaptured some sort of relevance. It's actually interesting. You're absolutely right. That was the nuance there, that they suddenly felt like they were visible in society again, that they weren't counted out. And there were a couple of the women too who'd perhaps pursued um, another aspect of their life. So maybe they'd dropped out of their career to raise children for a certain number of years, and then they were re-entering the workforce, and they felt physically that they'd lost some of their social relevance and social currency. And then
Yeah.
the aesthetic procedures that they had brought them back in line.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's where that happens that we can see not just benefits for confidence, but also benefits sometimes for your professional life and your professional performance and your social life, because people feel like, I can be seen again, which I think is terrible from a society perspective, that people feel like they need to, and that we have that bias. But I do think that's something that these treatments gave to the people that we saw in the Merz confidence campaign, that it gave them that feeling of being visible again, or being able to put themselves out there again. And we see that in Just Like That as well, which is why I
Yeah,
love
very much so.
that
Yeah.
capability.
The other thing that I wanted to ask your opinion on, again, it comes from the videos that we watched at that presentation, is what happens when, so, we follow the journey of these people who are perhaps having these treatments for the very first time, and, they find that they are looking better. The thing that I thought was interesting, and definitely it plays with the conversations that I have with people my age, is in your head, often you feel a lot younger than maybe you're presenting to the world. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of people like to have the aesthetic procedures, but also will even dress a certain way or style their hair or makeup a certain way. And because they feel that there's an incongruence between how they feel in their heart and how they perceive themselves in their head and what the outside world sees. And I'm wondering, as a clinical psychologist, do you think that's an unhealthy chasm, or do you think that that's quite normal and nice to embrace?
I think it's a really normal thing. Like whenever we have that incongruence in various areas of our life, if it's attractiveness, if there's a way we feel like we would like to look or our ideal self that we're not living up to, it's natural that we look for ways to sort of narrow that gap and bring it back together again. So I think in that way, if you're feeling youthful and you're feeling, you feel like your appearance isn't reflecting that, of course, look for ways to bring that more congruence into your life and to embrace the identity that you feel like you should have. I think, obviously everything can be taken to the extreme, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that, in wanting to look on the outside how you're feeling on the inside.
Your research also talked about self-assessment and other assessment. Can you share some insight into that part of your research?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things with the Merz research campaign, I think was one of the most astounding statistics that I saw, was that 98% of people who had injectables reported improvements in self-confidence, which is huge.
Yeah,
That was
that's
like
pretty
almost
good.
everyone felt like they had either slightly or greatly improved their confidence. And they also, as well as that, there were improvements in self-esteem and happiness in general. But what I've always been really interested in is when I see that, I'm like, yeah, great, they're feeling better. But I wonder if other people notice that change in you as well. And so I reported on some research by Stephen Dayan and colleagues.
Yes.
Yes. And so they essentially showed pictures of people before and after getting injectable treatments and asked observers to rate, who would you perceive as being more attractive or having better social skills or being more intelligent or kind. And people post-treatment were often rated as being, kinder, healthier, more trustworthy, more friendly.
I know that
Yeah.
kind of blows my mind because, it goes back to what we started the conversation with, is that there is definitely that overlay. And so you can see why society, and you can say, I mean, what is the spend? It's something like $1.1 billion was spent
Yeah.
in physical enhancement procedures. And of that, I think 350 million of it was non-surgical. Um, enhancement. So it's a big business, and it's really easy to kind of, for lack of a better word, poo-poo it. But the science and the research points to the fact that, yeah, unfortunately or unfortunately, that boost in confidence, that enhanced physical appearance does open more doors, that does result in a different internal and external validation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, we can't deny that. The fact is, this is the society we live in. We have these socio-cultural influences that mean that attractiveness matters, and the way we look makes a difference. And so, of course, in turn, getting aesthetic treatments can impact our self-confidence and the way that we're perceived by others.
So I
Um,
think the interesting thing that, your research for me uncovered is, if that's the case and that's an absolute and it's been proven, then surely the best way to kind of manage the healthiness of seeking beauty and is to give more examples of a variation of beauty ideals, because then that way we're not all gunning for that AI generated perfect, buxom or flat chested blonde or brunette AI model of standard definition of beauty. So if the media, if the society embraces multiple examples of what beautiful looks like, then even if we are seeking to improve our appearance, both for our own internal confidence and external validation, there's more than one way to look.
Yes. And I love that about the Merz campaign as well, because one of the main reasons they started this campaign, and Woodrow Wilson from Clinical Imaging was really passionate about it, was that, whenever you saw these before and after photos that were used in presentations and advertising, it was always stock photos of people who already looked quite perfect to begin with. And then it's like, well, you can't really tell the difference of what the aesthetic treatment did because they looked great. And this
Or
was
they
just
were doctored. They were like fake photos where
exactly.
which was disgusting. So I'm actually thrilled that there's been some rules around that.
Yeah. And then in this campaign, what it was just showcasing normal, regular people wanting to look like a better version of themselves, not wanting to look like someone else. And I think that was really powerful, and seeing the impact that unique beauty for them could make a difference. Wasn't looking like an influencer or looking like a celebrity. It was just like, I just want to look like a better version of me. And I think, like what you're saying, if we can showcase that, if there are diverse ways to be beautiful, to be attractive, whatever that means for the individual, I think that's a really nice direction for the industry to go in.
And let's, I have the pleasure of having you on my show, let's talk about body dysmorphic disorder in the context of weight, because I'm sure that you see a lot of patients in that. I know you specialize in non-surgical procedures, but you must also see a lot of patients.
Absolutely. And I think there can be a little bit of confusion sometimes between body dysmorphic disorder and eating disorders, because
Yes.
often when the focus is on weight and shape, and there's some kind of disordered eating or dieting or exercise present, it's probably more likely an eating disorder diagnosis. So body dysmorphic disorder tends to be mainly focused on like skin and facial features and hair.
Yes.
And that's one thing I find comes up in the media a lot when they're talking about body dysmorphia. I'll read the article and it will usually be sort of an eating disorder type presentation instead.
Very good. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for making that distinction. So let's assume that that we're not talking about an eating disordered person, but we're talking about truly a body dysmorphic client, and I guess how that would present is that when they start focusing on individual parts of their body, so they become fixated with their breast, for example, that they're not perfect, or they're strange shape, or they become fixated with the length of their neck, because you do hear about some really strange fixations.
Yeah. And often it's, a piece of evidence or information that they've read online, like, how long the philtrum should be or something, the perfect number of
Yes.
centimeters. And then that's the number that they fixate on. And then they might measure it and say, oh, mine's a millimeter, actually, a millimeter short. And now that's a problem. I need to fix that. And so it's usually, something they've heard or a comment that's been made about their appearance before that then can develop into this obsession or fixation. And you're
But we're
absolutely
all a bit like, no one is immune, and you have to be like in a pretty perfect state of mind always to push out all of this social messaging, all of this validation that you get externally. Um, you really have to be of extremely sound mind. And I don't know. I mean, I can only speak for myself. I definitely am not. A bad hair day can unravel a day for me, and that's the truth. I will, if I'm feeling really physically unprepared to face the world. It's not going to be a great day to like host a podcast.
Well, your hair looks fantastic today.
Wow, that's why we're recording.
But yes, definitely. We all have those things. We all have those insecurities. But, I have days like that as well, where I look in the mirror and I can't find an outfit and I'm feeling insecure, and gets to the point where you've tried 20 different outfits on and you're like, oh, I don't even want to go anymore. It's not worth it. Yeah. And so we all have that. I think the extent of it when it comes to body dysmorphic disorder tends to be more extreme, because most people, in a kind of a healthy state of mind, you might say, yeah, I hate how my hair looks today, but I can't cancel all the events on that I have to do. So I'm just going to go anyway. I'm not going to feel great about my hair. It's a bad hair day, but I'm just going to get on with it. Whereas often with BDD, it's really hard to actually do that. It's, I can't leave the house today because of how it looks.
Can I ask you, can you develop BDD without a traumatic experience? Because you noted some of the reasons why you might get BDD, but can overexposure to messaging that's, quite stressful around appearance, or quite emphatic, or biased around appearance, can constant exposure to that take a normal mentally, whatever normal is these days or ever it was, can it trip you into body dysmorphic disorder?
Yeah, of course. So trauma is common in people with BDD, but is not a necessary condition. It can be just, societal influences, social media. I think we see there's a study that reported 16% of cosmetic injectors themselves have BDD. And, we don't know if that's because they've had it beforehand, or it's just being immersed in that world where you're constantly talking about attractiveness and, making yourself more and more beautiful, that can start to impact people. Absolutely. And also there's a
That's
genetic.
really interesting. Wow. Yeah. Do you know what? It's so true, because I certainly do. I judge the outcome of my procedure by looking around the clinic, and I think, okay, everyone here looks beautiful yet normal. I'm safe here.
Yes. Yeah. And they know that, injectors know that their aesthetic is being judged by their potential clients. And so there's a lot of pressure for them to also look good and, to be their own advertising. And that can start to impact the way that you feel about yourself too.
So what can we do as normal people to avoid that decline in satisfaction from the aesthetic treatments that we're having, to keep a check, and maybe like have a few red flags, for lack of a better word, that we can just keep an eye on when it comes to our own view of how we're aging, what we look like, how we present to the world?
I think good before and after photography is really important in that process. So even, having photos before you start your aesthetic journey so that you can go back and compare to that. So not just before and afters for every treatment you have, but even just like from the very beginning. I think that can be a useful reminder for people. If you notice yourself starting to think, oh, I've improved this area, what else can I do next? Or this could be, tweaked a little bit more, to go back and look kind of where you started and how far you came, I think
It's
can be
really
quite.
good. And it's funny you should say that, because sometimes in the before and after, the clinical before and afters that I get at All Saints, which is where I go with Dr. Joseph, and I've been going there for years now, nearly 10 years.
Mm.
When I first get the before shots, I think, oh, I look so awful, and the after is so amazing. But since I've been going there for so many years, now I look back at my befores from 7 or 8 years ago, and I go, wow, I look great there.
Yes. And we all do that with photos. I often talk to my clients about that as well, because they hate being in photographs and hate what they look like. And then they'll look back on photos from 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and be like, oh, I wish I appreciated what I looked like back then. But at the time, they hated what they looked like in that photo. And
And you
so,
pick and you nitpick like really very, very specific things that you hate about a particular photo. And then you go back to it exactly like you said, maybe because you've aged, or maybe because you've kind of not fixated, or you're not in that mood, or with that particular phase of your life that's kind of distorting how you feel about yourself. And you go, you know what? That version of me she just looks like a really happy person in that photo. And I like that photo.
yeah. So other things when it comes to that, perception drift and keeping yourself in check, I think is, when you're looking in the mirror after you've had treatments, trying to stand like an arm's length away from the mirror, not standing too close up. Because I think as soon as you stand close up and you start to scrutinize things, you start to identify little things that other people would never notice about you. And so, keeping a distance and keeping the amount of time you spend looking at yourself in check can also be helpful. So,
Yes.
being in the mirror for when you need to, if you're doing your hair, doing your makeup. But then apart from that, really trying to kind of set some limits on the amount of time you're spending just scrutinizing your appearance. Because if we look for it, we'll find anything to fix. And so step away from the mirror and rather engage with other things, be with your friends, be with your family, do things that you enjoy. And all of that can help broaden our confidence outside of our appearance as well.
And your thoughts on using filtering and AI generated, because now you can get your LinkedIn photo generated by AI. You can have AI generate a suite of images which are kind of optimized. So that's even beyond filtering that we've been doing. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, it's natural that people want to do it. Again, it's about that putting their best face forward and, being the most secure version of themselves that they put up online. Um, However, what we do see is when people use filters and those AI images, the impact tends to be that as soon as they take the filter off or they step away and look at themselves in the mirror, they feel much more critical, much more negative about themselves because now they've seen this idealized artificial version. And so usually it can contribute to that low self-esteem and confidence. So as much as possible, I think it's better to not use the filters and just get used to seeing yourself as you are. Because there's an exposure effect of that. We get more comfortable with our appearance if we're seeing ourselves, naturally, or even just with makeup on, rather than seeing this edited, airbrushed version, which then makes us feel like our natural appearance is problematic.
It's funny you should say that because I decided maybe a year ago that I would balance my social media content with around 50% of it being with no makeup on. I don't use filters. Probably because they were so depressing to me because exactly as you said, once the filter was off, it was like, oh God, I don't like how I look. So I just thought, okay, no filters ever. That's my rule so that I don't have that disconnect afterwards. But
Yeah.
I did decide that I was going to share lots of content without makeup on. And it did actually impact my own level of comfort and happiness with just plain old me. And I became far less critical from the exposure to reality, or in the same way that exposure to an example I'll give is with hair. So ever since I was 19, I had my hair done twice a week at the hairdresser. I'm now 49. And during the pandemic, when you couldn't have your hairdresser come and do your hair or couldn't go to the salon, I was forced to face the reality of my thick, unruly Iranian hair that I had to manage myself. And at first, it was actually the most problematic aspect of the pandemic for me because it was just so different to how I had managed my appearance for decades. And then as I leaned into it, I thought, I actually like this untizzed up version of me. And now I have definitely reduced my reliance on having to have perfectly blown out hair. Before I used to not even be able to go on holidays without booking hairdressing appointments ahead of time. So I definitely suffered with that dysmorphic kind of version of what's acceptable. Like I am not acceptable if I have that natural hair. So anyway, pleased to say that I can go out with natural hair without any discomfort. And I also enjoy having my hair blown out, but I can go both ways. And the same now, I'm finding my feet with no makeup days, full glam days.
And that's exactly, a perfect place to be in when it comes to beauty treatments and aesthetic treatments and any of those sorts of things that, I like to do it because it makes me feel good. And, you might have a preference of having your hair done. But if you can't do it for whatever reason, it's not going to stop you from living your life because that you're okay without it. People still care about you. You're still worthy. You're still acceptable, whether you've got your hair curly or straight or blown
I mean,
out or
I
whatever.
actually remember I was going on a holiday to Cuba and being so distressed that I couldn't find a hair salon
Yeah.
before arriving there. I mean, that's actually ridiculous. That's stupid. So, and I did find a hairstylist in Cuba when I got there, but that's a really that you've jumped the shark when that's a consideration in your enjoyment of an amazing travel opportunity. So I do know that I used to go way too much and so I'm trying to undo some of those things. And I even did a little experiment on not having Botox for double the length of time in between appointments. Again, because I wanted to just stretch out my reliance on that personal feedback that I gave myself on how I looked. And once I kind of got past the discomfort of that expectation that I was meant to look a certain way, it didn't matter at all. Didn't matter. I prefer myself with a full face of filler and Botox, but I can live without it.
Exactly. And I actually did some research where I was tracking how people were feeling about their body image throughout the pandemic. And one of the very first surveys that I did I think it was in May 2020, was about beauty treatments and how people were coping without their Botox and their fillers and their nails and their hair. And the distress levels were high. Like lots of people were feeling how you were feeling, can't believe I can't get these routine treatments. But then as time went on, it was exactly that exposure effect. It was like, actually, this is kind of nice now. I've got a little bit of extra money. I've, saved a bit of time. There are all of these things that they've now adjusted to and maybe didn't feel like they needed as much as they thought they did.
Well, it was just such a joy to have this conversation with you. I could speak to you about this subject again and again. And in fact, we might revisit this because I'd like to have this conversation in the context of surgery. Perhaps we could have that conversation another time. But thank you so much. And I truly appreciate you sharing your valuable insights and also some how to's on how we can possibly make sure we don't trip into something that's more problematic and then we can have the confidence just to be ourselves.
My pleasure. It was so lovely talking to you as well. And I would love to come back and chat to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pikoos.